Hello, I'm Ron Miscavige, and this is Life After Scientology. And that little cut of music you heard is a song called Spanish Green. And that's on the album I did in 1974 in England for Polydor. And if you want to hear it or hear the other cuts, go to my site, therealronmiscavige.com, where it says music, media. Just click on that and you can go. And the album is digitized, and I call it timeless. So you can listen to any of the cuts, or you can buy them if you'd like, and I wish you would. But so much for that. Now, we have one patron I'd like to announce, and that's Melissa Maresha. Melissa, I hope I haven't murdered your name for $1. Thank you very much, Melissa. And if you want to know what that's all about, well, it's this. We don't have a sponsor. We're doing this on our own dime. So if you care to contribute to the ongoingness of this program and enlightenment on the various things that the Church of Scientology has done that I think should be exposed, and that's why I'm doing it. You can become a patron, and for any amount, like $1, $2, $5, $10, $100, whatever it is, and it would be very much appreciated. So that out of the way, let's get on with the show. And today I have a very special guest, so I have a very special announcement for him. So here it is. Now, in center ring, weighing in at 175 in the red trunks, the middleweight champion of the world of freedom fighters, Tony Ortega. Take it away, Tony.
Yeah, you mentioned that we haven't met yet. When we meet, you'll see I'm not 175 pounds. I wish I were.
Wait, what are you, 174?
A little bit north of that. We'll just keep it at that. How's that? Great to be here, Ron. Great to see you.
Good seeing you too. I thought I'd do a little special because I am unabashedly an absolute fan of yours for what you've done over many years. The consistency and the everyday fight that you put on, I'll tell you, is very admirable, Tony. And I'm very pleased to have you on as my guest. And that's a true compliment. I'm not trying to borrow money from you, and so just accept it for what it is. I'll tell you how I'd like to start it, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
When you were a little kid, did you kind of stand up to bullies? Did you have this feeling in your heart that you weren't going to be pushed around or what's the story on it? Is there a story there?
Actually, it's funny that you asked me that because I actually won an award in elementary school at only about 6 or 7 years old because two kids, the two newest kids in school, got into a fist fight in the back of my class. And I liked both of these kids. I had made quick friends, and I felt really bad about it, and the teacher wasn't doing anything about it. I went to the back to try to get between them to stop the fight, and the one kid did this roundhouse trying to hit the other kid and got me right in the mouth. So the only person who came out of the fight bloodied was me. And they ended up giving me this award at an assembly in front of the whole school. They called it the One for All for One and One for All award. Wow. And so I thought that was, I don't know, I guess I was inspired by that. I like the idea that, I tried to stop a fight, and then in high school, I actually did stand up to the administration. I ended up suing my high school over the First Amendment dispute involving the student newspaper, if you can believe that.
Wow.
So I was always kind of, I guess, a little bit of a troublemaker and a guy who fought for rights and that kind of thing. So
that's not a troublemaker. That's what people would like to call you. I call you a peacemaker, man. That's admirable. I knew the story there because you just don't automatically do what you did as an adult. You must have had that kind of in your DNA growing up, and I appreciate that story.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons I was drawn to journalism. I actually stayed away from it for a while. The high school thing, actually, it's interesting. I was the editor of the student newspaper, and we had uncovered this story about the football coach, and the faculty was angry, and they locked up the newspaper, and I fought that, and all this drama. It was in the local newspapers and stuff. But one of the interesting outcomes of that was I became a news story, and I was interviewed by actual reporters from the Los Angeles Times and the Orange County Register. And I have to tell you, Ron, I was a little shocked because I held reporters in such high esteem as these glamorous figures. And when I met some actual reporters doing actual work, they seemed miserable to me, you know. And I think the sort of glamour of it wore off, and I stayed away from journalism for a while, and I didn't come back to it. I had been a college English instructor for several years. I didn't come back to it until I moved to Phoenix in 1995 and discovered this weekly newspaper that blew me away.
Wait a minute, I got a question. Where did this take place? Where were you raised?
I grew up in the most beautiful garden part of Southern California, Compton. You know, it's like
Tongue in cheek, man.
You have those wonderful stories in your books about where you're from in Pennsylvania and that kind of rough upbringing, and I could really relate to it because I grew up in one of the worst parts of LA.
Yeah,
and then eventually ended up out in Orange County for high school, and that's where that whole dispute happened. Then I went to Northern California for some graduate school, but eventually I ended up in Phoenix, and I discovered this weekly paper that just, whatever had driven me away from journalism, this newspaper brought me back to it. It was everything I wanted in a publication.
Tony, what year was that you went out?
It was 1995. I was about 32 years old, and I discovered, this weekly paper called the Phoenix New Times was just everything, everything that's wrong with American journalism, this publication seemed to have right. It treated its readers with a lot of respect, and it assumed an intelligent reader that really wanted to know what was going on and not sugarcoat things. It wasn't interested in black and white. It wanted to get into the gray messiness of what was really happening in Arizona politics. And I was just stunned that this thing even existed. I'd never seen anything like it. And I just took a wild chance, Ron. I just spent all night writing the best possible email I could craft to the editor and said, listen, I'm this overeducated, underemployed 30-something that would like to sink his teeth into a good job. You can have something for me there. And they really liked what I wrote and had me come down and just sort of gave me a tryout. And it was while I was doing that one of the things we did at that weekly paper was we tried to find stories that the Daily had either missed or done badly. And, when you're talking about the Arizona Republic, that wasn't too difficult to do. But one day I was reading the Arizona Republic and I saw this letter to the editor. This was in about, August or September 1995. And it was a letter from a guy saying that, you covered my lawsuit and the fact that I lost this $5 million judgment, but you didn't even bother to mention that the plaintiffs were recruited against me by the Church of Scientology.
Wow.
And I thought that sounds juicy. And, since I was from LA, when you grow up in LA, you have a certain awareness of Scientology, whether you see it or not, right? I mean,
yeah, that's true.
I remember when Hubbard died, reading about that in the paper and all that. So I had sort of a basic understanding of what Scientology was. And so I called this guy up. His name's Rick Ross. He's a very well-known national cult, deprogrammer guy today. Yeah. Everyone knows him today. Back then, he wasn't as well-known. And I got to write like the first real profile of him. He was battling about 5 different groups at that time, only one of which was Scientology. And it became my first cover story for that publication that came out in November 1995. And it was the story that basically got me my full-time job there. So it was a huge deal for me. And, I just went on to write a lot of other things for that newspaper. But about a year later, I got to know Jeff Jacobson, who was being picketed at his own house because he had dared to criticize the Church of Scientology. So I wrote that story. And that's the nice thing about that kind of a magazine-style publication is the writers have a lot of freedom to kind of develop specialties. So I didn't write about it all the time, but every year or two, I would find some good, juicy cover story to write about Scientology. In 1999, a few years later, they had opened a newspaper in Los Angeles, New Times LA. And so I got to know the editor there. He really wanted me to come out. So I came out to LA. So I came home, essentially.
Yeah.
And of course, the Scientology stories there were incredible. So that's where I got to write the Graham Barry story, the Tori Christman story, which is one of my favorite of all time, the story of how Tori Christman first came out of Scientology in 2001. And, again, got to develop this specialty there. And that's when I, started talking to, people all over the country. But then that paper closed in 2002, and the company moved me around for a while to places, back to Phoenix. Then I was in Kansas City for a couple of years. Then I was in Fort Lauderdale. And those cities really, Scientology just doesn't have much of a presence. And so I wrote about politics and business and education and sports and all kinds of things. But then I was in Fort Lauderdale. I had become the editor-in-chief now of one of their papers there. And the company had bought the Village Voice. And they had put an editor there that was a really fine journalist, excellent writer, but he'd struggled as a manager. And so the paper was in a little bit of trouble. And so the owner of the company came to me and said, how'd you like to run New York? And I said, wow, okay, let's go. And so they moved me to become the editor-in-chief of the Village Voice in March 2007. And I had my hands full, Ron. I mean, my job was to take a legendary weekly newspaper that had a website and convince everybody that it was a daily digital news service that happened to have a paper. I had to turn over the thinking and get people thinking digitally and online. Yeah. And one of the things I like to do as a manager is I like to set an example. So I was asking all these writers who were used to just writing some little piece once a week. Now you need to write something every day. I decided that I should write something every day. And so what I did at first for 3 years was I did this archive project. The Village Voice had these fantastic paper archives going back to 1955. And I was so happy. I would just dig through those archives. And I did a project where every day I would pull out one article from a consecutive week in the paper. So, I went through the 50s, the 60s. I found the very first mention of a musician named Bobby Dylan who had come to the Village. I found the very first story that mentioned a young comic named Walter Allen, a.k.a. Woody. I was just so fun. The only problem, Ron, was that nobody was reading them, right? They were getting no comments. But I was trying to set an example that, see, you can put something on the website every day. It's not that much of a burden. And like I said, I did that for 3 years. In the meantime, less than a year after I got there, the anonymous thing exploded, right? And suddenly Scientology is this huge story again. And I've still got stories from LA that I never even got to publish that are just sitting in my hard drive.
Wow.
So I decided, hey, usually the rule is you want to try to cover your local city, but the Village Voice is kind of national. And I felt like, I should be able to cover Scientology anywhere from this paper. And so I started putting a few stories about Scientology on the website, never in the paper, just on the website. And man, every time I did, it just was an explosion of readers and comments. And wow, this is fun. And finally, so that's how I got to, for example, I got to write the first press article about Jason Beghe. The day after his video appeared, Tori Christman called me up and said, how would you like the first interview with Jason? I said, I'd love it.
Well, wait a minute, Tony, before you go on.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell people about his video before we get further than that? Because,
Jason, we had talked about this the other day. Something I wanted to point out is you were asking me, like, I've been writing about Scientology for 23 years now. And you were asking me what were some of the milestones in that. And
right, exactly.
Definitely for me, Tori coming out was a milestone because Tori Christman was the first person to defect from Scientology live on the internet. And this was 2001. The internet was still fairly young. That was amazing. Yeah. And that allowed me to talk about Andreas Heldal Lund at Norway and all kinds of it. That was a big thing. Going back farther than that, mid 90s, of course, were incredible for Scientology versus the internet. And I got to witness some of that. I didn't get to write so much about it. But then I think one of the things that I got to see happening in front of me that is a real landmark was I'd come to New York. I had was starting to cover Scientology on their website, and then this Jason Beghe video pops up. And Jason is a longtime character actor who had gotten to be the lead in a couple of movies. Right. So he wasn't as big a name as Leah Remini or some Tom Cruise or anything. But he was a legitimate, fine actor and had been for many years, and had some key roles that a lot of people remember, Melrose Place, for example. And he was the first Scientology celebrity not to leave. Plenty of Scientology celebrities get involved quietly and then they leave quietly. He was the first one to come out and say, this is a scam. Yeah. And he sat down with Mark Bunker and Tori, and he did this, I don't know, 2-hour-long video talking about how he'd been ripped off. And then Mark very intelligently just took out like a 3-minute segment of that. That's the thing that went viral because, you know, people love the quick videos. So I then got to write a story about him the next day and introduce myself. We got to talk for a while. And what was really fascinating about it was that I then got to meet him just a few days later because he flew out as a result of that video. He flew out to New York to do a long interview with 2020 and Elizabeth Vargas. Sorry, right. This light is flickering. And he said he'd meet me. We got together and have dinner. And I remember he was amped, Ron. He had just spent 3 hours.
Wow.
And he said, I told him everything, Tony. I told him everything that's wrong with Scientology. And he says, but I don't know what they're going to do with it. And to this day, they haven't aired a second of it. It was such a waste of time, right? But the thing that was really fascinating for me was we had so much fun talking. We didn't want it to end. And he said, listen, tomorrow I'm going to take a train down to my parents' house in D.C. Why don't you come with me? I said, sure. So the next day, we spent another 2 or 3 hours on the train talking about Scientology. And I got to meet his folks. I actually stayed over with him at his folks' house. And then, Ron, I had to go home. But you know where Jason went after that? After spending a day with his parents, he went to Virginia to talk to your son.
To talk to Ronnie?
To talk to your son, Ronnie, in Virginia. And to get the lay of the land about who was out and what was going on. And that's when Jason learned that Mike Rinder had defected and nobody knew.
And you know, Mike Rinder stayed with Ronnie when he first came out.
I didn't know that. Maybe he met him there. I don't know. But the point is, Jason then went on to Texas to talk to Marty Rathbun. And I know that Amy Scobie and Matt Pesch had already been there. But Jason was one of the first to get together with Marty. It was Jason Beghe who went around the country and convinced everybody we need to do something as a group. And I really believe that's why the Truth Rundown and the Tampa Bay Times happened about a year later, was because Jason got everybody riled up. So to me, that's a huge landmark, and I'm glad that I got to see one little part of it, you know?
I'll tell you, this is the first time I heard this. You got to believe that. Listen, of course, I was trapped in those days.
You were at a base at that time, right?
I didn't get out till 2012, but this story, I did not know this.
Jason, I've always said that Jason does not get the credit he deserves for how much things have changed with the Church of Scientology. He was the first celebrity to really come out and speak out against it on video. I guess before him, you could say William Burroughs caused some damage when he came out. That's true, but that was what, 37 years before. Way before.
Now, I tell you, as far as Jason is concerned, I recognized how good of an actor he was when I was in the church, and he did a couple of bit roles for the church. And I said to him, man, I'll tell you, you're like another Humphrey Bogart. He kind of reminded me of that actor.
Well, and they tried to make him pay the price for that. They really went after him in such a. I wrote about it a little bit, but really, there's more than people know. They tried to destroy his life, just like they did so many other people. And look how well he's come out of that. He had a recurring role in Californication. Now he's got his own series, Chicago PD. I mean, I really am so happy to see how well he's done.
Oh yeah, me too. I mean, he's a real good guy too.
So then after that, as far as landmarks go, I wrote a few more stories on the Village Voice website. And then in April 2011 was this incredible story coming out of Texas. I had been reading Marty Rathbun's blog for a couple of years, and now he was writing about these Scientologists that showed up on his porch, the squirrel busters.
Right.
And that's when I realized, nobody's reading this archive thing. Every story I put on the website about Scientology goes crazy. There's something happening about Scientology somewhere in the world every day. This is what I should be blogging about. And that's when I made the switch. It was in April 2011. I've been writing about Scientology pretty much every day. It's since then, so more than 7 years. And that was a huge landmark, was what happened with Marty. But then the next big landmark, the one that really changed everything, was the last of June, early July 2012. In 1 week, 4 big things happened. Katie ditched Tom, and Katie Holmes ditched Tom Cruise, and that created a tsunami of press about the Church of Scientology.
Right.
But what people forget about, the same week that happened, I broke the news that you had left Int Base. Now, I know you left in March, but it took a while for that word to get out. And it was in July that I broke the news that you had left Int Base, and so had Roanne Horwich, Diana Hubbard's daughter.
Yeah, and if you remember the story on that, Roanne had planned to blow the same day I did. But once I blew, then the antennas went up all over, and she couldn't leave for another month.
Well, then none of it got to me until July, but then I got to say it. This is huge. Yeah. I mean, David Miscavige's own father has blown the base.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating. But also that's the same week, I'm sorry, that we got the news that Danny and Tammy Lemberger had taken an entire mission of Scientology in Israel and had broken away. The whole mission, all 40, 50 people, it was like Scientology was falling apart in front of our very eyes. And sadly, it was also the week that Karen De La Carriere learned that her son, Alex, had died. Wow. And I couldn't believe it. I was covering, it was like the craziest week of my life, trying to cover all these stories. And it just felt like, everything had changed at that point. There was so much press, so much interest. And it's like it has never settled down since then.
No, there's still high interest in every aspect of Scientology. Not as far as people going in and doing a course, but, people who've left and, just the defectors, what they have to say about it, and the abuses. It's just coming so public now. There's no question.
There have always been people who left Scientology and revealed its secrets. I mean, going back to the 50s.
Yeah.
And there's always been press interest. There's always been public interest. But, you really have to give a lot of credit to Leah Remini and Mike Rinder that they've sped up that whole process over the last 2 years, right? I mean,
yeah.
Yes, there have been other exposés, other media, other defectors, but they've just sped up this whole process to a dizzying rate at this point. People coming out on Facebook every other day. I was in Scientology. It wasn't so long ago, Ron. It was difficult to find anybody who had left Scientology that wanted to talk about it, Yeah. And now it's just such a different situation.
Well, people were afraid. They just figured they're going to come after them. They're going to destroy their lives. And of course, they try to do that, but thank God they're unsuccessful in almost all cases because
there's definitely still going after people. And I mean, I think you've been probably the biggest target in the last couple of years. I mean, they go after you with everything they've got. And
Tony, let me tell you something. They purchased over 500 iterations of my name on GoDaddy. That's more than a combined total of Leah, Mike Rinder, every one of them combined. And if you go to that, and if you don't put in therealronmiscavige.com, you'll go to a hate site. And if you were to believe these things, I should have been shot a week ago.
No, I know. They do it to Leah. They do it to Mike. They do it to you. If they didn't do it to me, I'd feel left out, So they,
there you go.
I got my hate sites too.
There you go. The thing, I don't give a hoot. I don't care what the hell they say. It doesn't matter to me. Anybody can say anything, okay?
Yeah, and that's the attitude you have to have because they're not going to stop. And it's just, we've got so much to talk about as far as what they're doing. And so we just focus on that.
I know I have a successful interview when we air it after about a day, I'll have 90 likes and over 400 dislikes. I wonder if he's disliked.
That's funny.
So I hit a nerve. I know, hey, boy, this is a success. And even the comments, people say, come on, give me a break, you know. Well, I'll tell you, a lot of this stuff, of course, I didn't know because I was part of the church, but this is new news to me. A lot of these things. I'm glad we're doing this, Tony. And now you were talking about, I think, Marty at that point, last just a minute ago. Now, he was part of the Truth Rundown, right?
Yes. He was probably you would have to say, the biggest sort of part of it. Yeah.
And then Marty had people come after him, and now Marty is turned the other way.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I always enjoyed talking with him and sparring with him, and we did some great stories together. And I never, found that he ever steered me the wrong way about Scientology. Everything he told me was corroborated by other people.
Yeah.
And with the 180 he's done now, and not just dropping the lawsuit, which is kind of a subject of its own, but these videos he makes where he's trashing Leah and trashing Mike, who at one time was one of his closest friends.
I know that.
Mirroring me. And it's, it's just bewildering, and it's sad. I mean, I don't, the thing is, we've seen this in the past. We've seen this with other people. And Scientology is very, very good at, turning somebody around like this.
Well, if you have a spigot that you turn it on and the money starts coming out and there's no end to it, and I'm talking about maybe a $3.5 billion war chest, that can buy a lot of things. And you have hot and cold running attorneys who are willing to do anything for money. This is the way it goes. And, I liken them to the Titanic, where, they have enough bilge pumps pumping water out of the staterooms, but it is definitely going down. It isn't going to keep on going, but how long it's going to take, I don't know. That's just a guess I would have. I want to bring up one other thing, because there's a guy by the name of Arnie Lerma. Was he not the first guy to reveal confidential information on the internet?
He was one of them. I often try to remind people that the first person who wrote about Xenu in print was Robert Kaufman in his book that came out in 1972.
Oh, you're right.
People forget about that.
I forgot about it. Not people.
Richard Libby, great reporter, Washington Post. When he was with the Clearwater Sun, he wrote about Xenu in 1980. And then the Los Angeles Times guys wrote about all that stuff in 1986 and 1990. But yeah, 1994, 1995, things got real interesting, because Arnie and several other people, you can't forget people like Dennis Ehrlich, Bob Penny, and some others, Karen Spank in the Netherlands, all suffered incredible harassment, legal harassment, by legal authorities. I mean, the Scientology would convince these judges to send marshals to raid these people's homes because they dared to share some of these secret teachings of Scientology on the early internet. But Arnie was definitely one of them, and he suffered quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was another guy, Wollersheim. I remember
Lawrence Wollersheim. That was earlier. Wollersheim was a Scientologist who was suing, and this is what drove them crazy about his lawsuit, because he was suing over things that had happened to him like in 1969, and his lawsuit, I think, was originally filed somewhere around 1979. Yeah. But in the early 80s, this became a huge thing, because, and what I always try to explain to people about Larry Wollersheim's suit that's different than some of these others, like Laura DiCrescenzo's and stuff. Larry Wollersheim was suing over the idea that Scientology itself was harmful. He was saying this auditing, these levels, it messes up your mind. That's why that case was so bad for Scientology, because he presented his case and a jury awarded him $36 million or something. I mean, it was an absolute disaster for Scientology.
Right.
And so they had these massive demonstrations outside of Superior Court in like 84, 86, I'm forgetting exactly when. And one of the things that Wollersheim did to prove his point was he put those Xenu materials in the court file. And so what the Church of Scientology did was they had this line of people at the courthouse checking out those materials, over and over again, so nobody could get their hands on them. But a Los Angeles Times reporter finally got those materials, and the LA Times wrote about Xenu based on those court documents. It was either 84 or 86, I don't remember what, but that was huge deal. And
by the way, I was there as part of that demonstration. I was in the Sea Org at the time, so it must have been 86.
Okay, 86. And so were you chanting not one thin dime for Wollersheim?
Not one thin dime, and it turned out he got a lot of thin dimes.
Well, what happened was so the LA Times got that document in 86 and wrote an explosive story about it. That is what inspired the LA Times then to put Joel Sapel and Robert Welkos on this series they did in 1990. And that was just a major landmark that I know the Time magazine story came out the year later, but the LA Times series was fantastic. So Wollersheim won this huge award. An appeals court reduced it way down to like $2 million or something. But the Church of Scientology still refused to pay it. And so interest grew it over the years as they fought over it. And what Scientology tried to do, this is one of the things that had motivated Hubbard to reorganize Scientology a few years earlier, was he didn't like everything being in one pot of money, right, Ron? He wanted to separate it out into lots of little groups. And so they created CST, ASI, RTC, and all these groups. And while Wollersheim was trying to get his money, he had sued the Church of Scientology of California, CSC. They bled that thing dry. So by the time he finally got very close to getting the money, Scientology said there's no money there because they had taken it out and moved it around.
Right.
It wasn't until 2002, and I was covering this at the time, that they were putting together an affidavit on behalf of Wollersheim, written by Robert Von Young, former spokesman for the church.
Right.
And he explained that whole alphabet soup. He explained how David Miscavige is actually in control of it as the captain of the Sea Org. Really amazing affidavit that explained everything. They were scheduled to go into court in May 2002 to hear that affidavit and this argument. That morning, the Church of Scientology showed up with a check for $9 million and gave it to Wollersheim and got rid of the case.
Wow.
26 years after he had originally won his case. And I remember Wollersheim told me, he said, well, I hope my victory inspires other people to sue the Church of Scientology. And who wants to wait 26 years?
Now. 26 years. Now, listen, that's the last thing in the world I would do, because you'll be caught up in litigation for decades. You know that. And I guess everybody in the right frame of mind knows it, but
that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited about this new story I've been doing about this gentleman named Ephraim Laguerra, who's a 75-year-old man in Los Angeles who joined Scientology just last year at 74, and they ran up $73,000 worth of charges on his credit cards, and then kicked him out. They wouldn't let him take any courses. So he said, okay, give me my money back, and they wouldn't give him his money back like they always do. But then I started talking to him, and it's a clear case of elder abuse, right? And so Scientology has been doing everything they can to give him his money back. I've got a new story coming out tomorrow that I think you're going to find really interesting, just to what lengths they're trying to. When was the last time you heard Scientology going crazy trying to give somebody money because they know what trouble they're in on that one?
I'll tell you how far back it goes. Never.
Exactly.
Never.
You're going to enjoy tomorrow's story, because what they tried to do over the last week is just mind-blowing to me. Scientology knows they're in big trouble because California has some very serious elder abuse litigation laws, but also enforcement. They have whole divisions that work on that. So, and I, as I reported in my first story about him, he is talking to law enforcement. So that's a fun case to watch. But but yeah, he's like the opposite of Wollersheim and so many other people. Like, you know, the Garcias, my goodness, they just spent 5 years trying to get their money back, and this court won't even hear it. I mean, it's just shocking.
And this story about this guy, I can't pronounce his name.
Effort.
This is the ice cream story, right?
Right.
3 chicks, they took him out for ice cream. Then they conned him out of $74,000. Yeah, it's fair enough, you know. That's standard operating procedure for the church.
I couldn't believe it, Ron. I was talking to him, and he was telling me about the various. He's been through so much just in 1 year. It's mind-boggling, and I've got all this documentation and everything. And then he started talking about this ice cream party, and I'm like, "What do you mean ice cream party?" He said, "Well, these 3 young women at the LA org, they took me down for an ice cream and said, Ron, Ephraim, will you help me? Will you help us?" He's like, "Oh, okay." And they're touching me and kissing me. He said, and he said, "Okay, I'll help you." And he said, I had no idea what they mean by helping was putting a $20,000 charge on his credit card, right? So I was listening to him. I was like, wow, I wonder what that looked like. You didn't happen to take any pictures, did you? He said, actually, I did. And he sent me that photo. Now, when you're interviewing somebody and they've been through something and you ask them if they've taken a photo and they say yes, you know, invariably it's a really bad photo and you can't really see what's going on. That photo was incredible, wasn't it? Those 3.
I'm telling you, man.
Oh,
it was like a pro photographer took it, you know.
I know.
Photo, you know,
if it was any other publication, they'd be going crazy. But you know, the bunker. But that was the Scientology picture of the year, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, that was great. Now, Tony, is there any particular story that you feel was the best you ever did?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean,
you've done a lot of them. For Christ's sake, you've been around for decades. But like,
I have favorites. I don't know which ones are the best I've done, but I definitely have favorites. I will always love my Tori Christman story with Andreas Held-on-Lund. I have a journalist friend in Europe that called me up and told me it made him cry. And for one journalist to tell another journalist that, there's no higher compliment. You know,
no, that is true. I agree. Tori Christman, I met her for the first time in LA about a year ago. Very interesting person. Why don't you relate a little bit about it?
Well, yeah. I mean, Tori's story is so great because it was just a different way for someone to leave Scientology. She was a public in Los Angeles, very dedicated Scientologist, and she became an OSA volunteer, which means that, you know, when the Scientology secret police needed some help, they would send her out to, for example, Mark Bunker talked about this, and when they would picket Big Blue, Tori would come out and harass them. Basically, that was her job, you know. And she took on this job of harassing critics online. There was this thing called alt religion Scientology that was very big at the time, and a lot of people were online at ARS debating Scientology. And she would just come in. She called herself Magoo, and she would just hammer people. It just all day with these postings, all day and night. So many postings around the clock that people I talked to about it all assumed it had to be a team of Scientologists. There's no way it was one person. But what Tori was doing was she would just hit a reply and copy everything that had been before. So she was not only basically harassing people, but she was clogging up the Usenet group with all this extraneous garbage. And so Andreas Held-on-Lund, who was the Norwegian who created the website Xenu.net, Operation Clambake, which has been one of the biggest thorns in the side of Scientology of all time.
Right.
He reached out to Magoo and said, look, you know, I understand you want to debate with us about Scientology, and that's fine, but your message really isn't coming through because you're copying all this garbage, and it just, you know, you're actually hurting yourself. Let me show you how to reply to people just with your message and cut the other stuff out. And she told me, she said, you know, Andreas Held-on-Lund was Satan. I mean, this guy was the worst thing in the, you know, as far as Scientologists could believe. And she said, here was Satan reaching out to me and giving me helpful advice. She couldn't believe it. And she thought about it, and it really affected her. And so behind the scenes, she and Andreas began having a conversation and talking about her experiences in Scientology. And she realized that everything and you have to understand about Andreas is he's very understanding. He's not a harsh critic. He's somebody that wants to understand the Scientology point of view. Really gentle guy, great guy. And he just broke down all of her defenses. And she just said to him one day in July 2000, I think it was July 2000, something like that. She just said, "That's it. I'm no longer a Scientologist."
Wow.
And she went out on the news group and she said, "I'm Magoo. I'm just one person. My name's Tori, and I have left the Church of Scientology." And of course, everybody assumed it was a hoax. Nobody believed it. But over time, people realized, wow, we just watched somebody walk away from the church live on the internet. And eventually somebody contacted me and said, she might be interested in the story. And so I got to meet her and we hung out. And Ron, she was terrified. I mean, this is, you have to understand,
Yeah.
most people who leave are terrified, but especially in 2000, 2001, it was a scary time then, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I can still remember we had a long interview. I'd gotten her story down. We were very close. And she called me up and said, "I changed my mind. I can't do this. I'm not prepared for it." And I said, "Tori, the story's done. I think it's a true story. It's really powerful." And just sort of talk, calmed her down. And that story came out. And 17 years later, that's still one of my favorite. It's very genuine, very human. And she, you see her, she makes great videos. She's a lot of fun.
She is. She's a very personable person. She's just very approachable and just open, And by the way, Mr. Magoo, that was a comic, a cartoon character, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that's why she used it. Sure.
Yeah, that's interesting because I do remember that, and not really a great TV watcher, but he was one of the more interesting characters. And another guy called Steamboat Willie. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And when I was in New Orleans 2 years ago, we were down on a cruise. I sat in with the band that was run by Steamboat Willie. He's a trumpet player down there. And we had a great little jam session together. Totally a different aside.
Well, I'm a great admirer of your trumpet playing. I've told you before that I played a little trumpet in high school and that kind of thing. So I know maybe more than most people just how difficult it is what you do and how well you do it. So I'm a big fan.
Well, I thank you. Well, I'll tell you how to do it. You got to practice. That's the bottom line. And unless you have that dedication to just put in the hours, you'll never get the amount of much. But I actually started playing when I was 13 years old in a bar.
Wow.
And still going at it. Anyway, that's, as they would say, tangential. Does that mean it's off the subject?
That's all right. That's okay.
So I don't know what the hell. But anyway, I brought it up. So look, I was going to ask you this question, but I can see that what keeps you going. But you can give your own input on that if you'd like.
Yeah. I mean, once I sort of gave myself the job of beat reporter about the Church of Scientology, I just really enjoyed that aspect where I feel like I'm sitting in the front row to an amazing story that's unfolding in front of all of us. Scientology, as much as it tries to be unchangeable because it's following L. Ron Hubbard's words to the letter, it really has been changing a lot over the last 15, 20 years. And that's really, I find fascinating to follow that. I really enjoy breaking big stories and interviewing people and trying to help people out. So, I mean, listen, I'll be honest. I mean, over the last 7 years, there have been times when I get a little low energy. I think, oh God, I got to get to something else for the blog. But, just this last 2 weeks has been wild. I mean, we had Laura DiCrescenzo's case settled. I got to break the news on that. The Garcia case got knocked down by the judge. I don't know if they're going to appeal or not. That was just really depressing, but fascinating. I mean, when you do this kind of work, you're going to report the good and the bad. And I try my best to be fair to Scientology. They have a victory. I write about it. And I actually get some, criticism for that. I mean, the other day, for example, one of our correspondents, I have a lot of tipsters, got into the maiden voyage event on L. Ron Hubbard Way in Los Angeles. And this is a tipster I trust. Okay. This guy and I go back a long way. And I know when he tells me he saw something that I can trust it. And he said, Tony, the regging just isn't the same. I mean, it's just less intense than it used to be. And so I reported that straight at my website, and I got such a complaint from somebody about why would you give Miscavige credit? And it's like, look, I think it's a sign of desperation from Miscavige. He knows that we've been watching him so closely that he's starting to cosmetically make things look a little less harsh in Scientology, right? He's canceled the RPF.
Yeah.
He's maybe dialed back a little bit on the regging, but that's all surface stuff. We know that he's not changed anything that really matters, like disconnection, like extorting people for money, like putting pressure on people to be part of these events. So, I just feel like my job is to report whatever that news is, whether it's good or bad, and sometimes people get angry at me for even just reporting the news, but it keeps me going. I'm just I don't see, the thing is, Ron, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and that's fascinating to me. I like to find out.
I can totally duplicate that because, boy, I'll tell you, I've never been a 9-to-5er as a work. I look, when I sold life insurance, I wouldn't say I was a 9-to-5er, but I had a place to go every day. But I've lived my life as a kind of a free spirit, and I can totally see your viewpoint on that, Tony. And look, before we end off, we got to talk about your book, for Christ's sake.
All right. Well, but I got a tough question for you, Ron. I got to put you on the spot before we end this thing. But real quick,
155. I don't know it. There's your answer.
Real quick, yes. So I came out with my book about Paulette Cooper 3 years ago, The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, and now Paulette is publishing a book that we've put together. That's the best of the bunker. Basically, we picked out a lot of the best stories that have appeared, and we've divided them into thematic areas, and she's written some intros, and the name of it is Battlefield Scientology, and it's coming out in another month or two. We're right near the end of putting it together.
Can people pre-order it?
Not yet. Soon, pretty soon. We're almost there. We're just it's Paulette's doing this. It's Paulette's project. It's Paulette's book that she's publishing. So when she lets me know we can pre-order, I'll let the world know.
Now, I got a question. Did you write about this on your blog?
Yeah, I announced it at HowdyCon.
Oh, okay. Then I heard it someplace, because this morning when I'm writing notes, I was going to ask you, don't you think it's a good idea to put a compendium, or whatever you call it, of all the different bunkers?
It is. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, but then Paulette approached me and said, we should do this, and I'd like to publish it. And I said, let's do it. So
wow.
that's I'm looking forward to that. So here's my tough question. I was telling you that, for me, these milestones, there are various milestones. One of the biggest was when I learned that you had left the base. And I wrote about that in July 2012. And then I spent years, I couldn't wait to hear your explanation of what you went through. And that's what I enjoy the most about your book, is you're going through the meticulous planning that you and Becky had to do to leave at base. And I love the ruse that you came up with, where you said you were sending Becky's mother birthday gifts, and right, you were going to send her like 75 gifts for her 75th birthday. And that way, every day you were able to box up some of your own possessions and mail them to her as if they were birthday presents. Brilliant. I thought that was so wonderful. And I thought that shows what somebody has to go through to escape at base. But the thing that just knocked me out was when you explained that these, because everything you sent out, it was a risk. There was a risk a guard might open it up and bust you guys. Yep. You were taking a risk. And what was it that you were risking your freedom for? You were mailing to yourself your L. Ron Hubbard books.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that, Ron. But now, 6 years later, what do you think about that?
Tony, excuse me. If you're a little bit nuts and you don't know you're a little bit nuts, you're really nuts. But it took me looking in the mirror one day after I spoke to a very good friend of mine, Fernando Gamboa, and he says, Ronnie, we were conned. And in my hallway, in my little home in Wisconsin here, there's a full-length mirror on the door to a little closet. I say a little because it was built in 1938, and they didn't have closets as big in those days because people didn't have a big wardrobe. Right. But I looked at myself in that mirror, and I said, Ron, you were conned. And that's when the whole bubble burst. And those books are down in the basement. And I don't know, I'll try to sell them or something. But yeah, you're right. I was sending out
the admin volumes, the green on white and management series. Forgive me, I was nuts. What am I going to say, Tony? You know,
it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story, and I'm glad you wrote about that and explained that. I think a lot of people kind of go through a process where, when they first leave, they're still very loyal to Hubbard and his ideas, but then if you go back a little bit later, they've had time to kind of think about it. And so I was curious about that with you. So you just explained it. That's great.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this: you have to come out and observe life, not from the viewpoint of a Scientologist, because most Scientologists are very arrogant. They think they have the answers to everything. Therefore, it blocks their perception of what life is all about, because they think they already know all about it. So you get out and you start looking at life, and you know, people are pretty goddamn nice. This is not what I thought WOGs would be like. You know, I was on staff for 26 and a half years,
right.
And it's a gradient process. It's like peeling an onion, you know, and taking all that stuff off. But okay, so I look forward to the book going on. And I got a little message from my producer here. What's up, Sean?
Hey guys, I just want to say you got a super chat, Ron, for 50 Norwegian krones from Halvard. He says, Ron, please interview Andreas Heldel Lund.
I will do it. I got to get in touch with him, and I have no contact. Tony, could you tell me how I can get in touch with him?
I'll put you in touch with him.
That would be great. I'd love to do it. And yes, tell him. What's his name again?
Halvard.
Halvard. I'm going to do it. I just got from Tony. He's going to give me his contact. So look forward to this in the near future, and I will be interviewing him. I hope he speaks English.
Oh, yeah. Of course he does.
Okay. Yeah. Well, of course. Otherwise, you must speak Danish. He doesn't speak English. All right. So, okay. Then look at just as a little final wrap up here. I want to ask you this question, Tony.
Yeah.
Did I answer the question about me being nuts?
You did. I really appreciate you taking my question. That was wonderful.
Yeah. How do you think the end is going to come about on Scientology? Do you have any thoughts on that?
You know, you might be able to help us understand that better than most. I think Dave has to know that things are really bad for him right now, as far as membership leaving. If you read Mike Rinder's website, he always has a lot of interesting data about whether, you know, they're having staffing shortages, they're not clearing anybody. I mean, we see more and more signs that this organization's in trouble. Yeah. But Dave does his best, and we have a piece on that this morning at the website. Dave does his best to make it look like things are expanding with all these new ideal orgs and everything else. He's trying to get more and more money from fewer and fewer people. And it just feels like something's got to give at some point. But it also feels to me like there's not going to be a real serious problem for Dave until there's some pressure from the outside. And it's not going to come from Laura DiCrescenzo suing. It's not going to come from the Garcias suing. And, you know, those people deserve personal justice. It's going to come from the government. The government is going to have to step in at some point and want to do something about the way Sea Org people are treated, about the way these families are being ripped apart, about the way people are being extorted, people like Ephraim Lagrera. And, you know, I'm always hearing things, Ron. I'm always hearing things about this agency's interested and that agency's interested. But then we never see any action.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Scientology has never been weaker as far as organizationally as it is right now. They do have a ton of money. Dave's got a ton of money to spend on attorneys and fighting everything.
Yeah.
But I just think he's going to be able to keep doing what he's doing indefinitely unless somebody decides to step in from the outside. And I think if anybody has inspired the government to do something, no one has done a better job of that than Leah Remini and Mike Rinder. And I really feel like they have got, like I said, they sped everything up. All these trends have been coming for a long time. People have been leaving, defectors have been coming out, journalists have been exposing Scientology. That's all been going on all along.
Yeah.
But Leah and Mike have sped things up so fast. And I think if the government's going to do something it's probably going to be because Leah and Mike got their attention. So I don't know, Ron. That's kind of what keeps me going, is when is that day going to come? When are we going to finally see some action?
Yeah. Tony, I think you're absolutely right. I happen to agree with you 100%. I'm not going to add another word to that because I think that was very insightful of you, and I agree.
Well, I say, I know a big part of it, it's been like a confluence of things. The celebrities coming out and speaking out, that's a big deal. The press paying more attention and also the press getting better at covering the story is a big deal. But then the father of the leader to come out and say, this thing is corrupt, that's absolutely huge. So, I mean, clearly your story and your bravery are a big part of why the Church of Scientology is in big trouble right now.
Tony, I appreciate that. And let me reciprocate saying that you are also part of that, because your persistence over decades is just very admirable. I got to tell you. So look, let me kind of pull the plug on it now.
Okay.
As an ender, let me get a little commercial here. You enjoyed this podcast, which I think was wonderful and very, very insightful. You can contribute to this by becoming a Patreon. Go to my website and it'll tell you how to do it, and it would be very much appreciated. But for all of you who enjoy this, another thing you can do is get somebody else to watch this and become a subscriber. And let's get this disseminated to a lot more people. I'd like to double the subscription within the next couple of weeks, which would be great. And if every one of you just got one other person to watch it, and if they like it, to subscribe, that'd be wonderful too. So, Tony, absolutely wonderful. I'm very thankful of you to come and do this with me.
Thank you, Ron. I hope I get to see you play trumpet soon.
Well, I hope you do. And for all of you, I'm Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. See you on the next episode.